The last lighthouse keeper. He accepted the job without hesitation. Most wouldn't have. The isolation alone was enough to turn people away. Working for months without contact, surrounded by nothing but open ocean. But the pay was generous, more than generous. And after everything he had left behind, silence felt like a reward. The island was a forgotten stretch of rock rising from the sea, far beyond any common shipping route. No houses, no roads, just the lighthouse, standing alone against the horizon. When the supply boat arrived, the transfer was quick. The driver spoke little, kept his eyes on the crates, on the dock. Anywhere but the tower looming above them. Before he left, he handed over the final ledger. He paused for a moment, then said, quietly, "Light must never fail." The lighthouse was older than he expected. Not really abandoned, no, everything was intact, but it felt untouched by time. The paint hadn't peeled. The glass was clear, the metal showed no sign of rust. It wasn't new, it was different, something else, something preserved. Inside, the air was still. No dust, no drafts, no slow decay of age, only a narrow spiral staircase climbing upward, and a faint scent that lingered in the walls. Oil, perhaps, or something deeper. Salt, and something metallic beneath it. He checked the generator first. It was already running, smooth and consistent, as if it had never been turned off. He made a note of it anyway. The previous keeper's logbook sat neatly on the desk, undisturbed for some time. He flipped through it slowly. Entries were routine and predictable. Weather patterns, supply counts, light inspections, nothing unusual. Until the final page. The last entry stopped mid-sentence. It was written more carefully than the rest, the handwriting tighter, deliberate. If it begins to... No date, no signature, no continuation. He closed the book and set it back where he found it. Unfinished thoughts meant nothing. Not out here. The first night came quickly. The horizon swallowed the last of the light, leaving only darkness and the endless motion of the sea, faintly visible from the light from the lighthouse. He climbed the tower for his first official check. Step by step, the narrow staircase spiraling upward, the air growing cooler the higher he went. At the top, the world stretched out in every direction. Black water, empty sky, no ships or distant lights, nothing but wind brushing against the glass, exactly what he had come for. The mechanism was old but stable, every part in place, every surface clean, reliable. He reached for the control panel, paused for just a moment, listening. Nothing. Then he switched it on. The beam ignited instantly, cutting through the darkness in a slow, sweeping arc, out across the empty sea. Back again, steady, precise, unbroken. He watched it for a while. The rhythm of it, the certainty hypnotic, the way it moved without hesitation, as if it had done this 1,000 times before, and would continue long after he was gone. For the first time in a long time, he felt at ease. He settled into the routine quickly. Morning checks, equipment logs, supply inventory. Evenings spent watching the horizon as the light made its slow, endless sweep across the water. There was comfort in the repetition, predictable and controlled. But on the third night, something changed. He noticed it just after midnight. Not a sound or a failure, a timing. He was halfway up the staircase when the light came on. He stopped, listened. The low hum of the mechanism echoed faintly down the tower. But he hadn't switched it on. For a moment, he stood there in the dark, one hand resting against the cold wall, listening to the machine above him doing its work. Then he continued upward, slowly. The control panel was exactly as he had left it. No signs of interference, no damage, and no fault indicators. Everything normal. and yet the light was already moving. He ran a full inspection, checked the wiring, then the relay switches, the generator output. Nothing, no irregularities or explanation. He logged it anyway. Automatic activation at 014. Cause unknown, system stable. By the time he finished, the fog had begun to roll in, thick and low, silent. It swallowed the horizon completely, leaving the beam to cut through a wall of shifting gray. That was when he saw it. At first, he thought it was a reflection, a trick of the light catching on the fog, a flash far out, gone almost as soon as it appeared. He leaned closer to the glass, narrowing his eyes, trying to find it again. Nothing. Just the slow sweep of the beam. Then, another flash. Same position, same intensity, too precise to be random. He watched the rotation carefully, counted under his breath as the beam moved out across the fog, disappeared, then returned. And there it was again. Perfectly timed. His first thought was simple. A vessel, someone signaling. He moved quickly to the radio, ran a scan across emergency frequencies. Nothing. No static, no voice, no distress call. He tried again, using a broader range. Still nothing. When he returned to the glass, the light flashed again. Waiting, he hesitated. Then, almost without thinking, he adjusted the rotation. Slowed it slightly. The beam stretched longer across the same section of fog. It held there. Silence. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the flash returned. Longer this time, matching him. He froze. Not delayed or approximate, just exact. He stepped back from the glass slowly, his eyes still fixed on the place where the light had answered him. There were no ships on the radar, no signal on any frequency. And yet something out there had seen the light and responded. He stood there for a long time, watching the fog shift and curl around the beam, waiting for another flash. It didn't come. Eventually, he returned to the desk and opened the logbook. For a moment, he hesitated. Then he wrote, "Unidentified light observed beyond visual range. Possible vessel. No radio contact." He paused, looked back toward the tower, then added one more line. Response appeared. Deliberate. When he closed the book, the lighthouse hummed softly around him, steady and unchanging. But somewhere beyond the fog, something had begun to pay attention. He didn't sleep much that night. The fog was lingering into the morning, thick enough to erase the horizon entirely. By midday, it had begun to lift. He stood at the edge of the rocks, staring out across the open water where the light had appeared. There was nothing there. No ships or debris. No markers of any kind. Just the ocean. It should have been enough to dismiss it. A trick of distance and reflection. Just a coincidence? But it wasn't. The following night, he was ready. He reached the top of the tower before midnight and didn't touch the controls. He waited and watched. 014. The mechanism engaged itself. The light came alive on its own. He didn't move or interfere. He simply observed. The beam swept outward into the darkness, and a moment later was answered by a flash out to sea. The same position and the same intensity. He exhaled slowly, his eyes fixed on the horizon. This time he counted. 1, 2, 3. The beam returned. Flash. Again. He grabbed the logbook and began marking it down. Intervals, timing, duration, each pass, and each response. Minutes turned into hours, and a pattern began to emerge. It wasn't random, and it wasn't drifting. It was structured. The flashes came in sequences. Short, long, pause, short, short, long, repeating and adjusting. He stared at the page, then back at the sea. Something about it felt wrong. It was too consistent and too immediate. He moved to the window again, leaning forward, his gaze narrowing as the beam passed over the same stretch of water. And this time, he saw more than just the flash, not above the surface, but below it, a faint glow, barely visible, like something deep beneath the water was catching the light and holding it. He froze. The beam passed again, and there it was, clearer now. Not a reflection or a trick of the eye, a shape, vast. It shifted slowly beneath the surface, too large to fully see, its edges dissolving into the blackness of the sea. And within it, points of light. It was moving and responding. The next flash came, not from the horizon, but from within the water itself. His grip tightened on the window frame. That wasn't possible. Light didn't behave like that. Not at that depth, and not with that clarity. He stepped back, his breathing shallow now, his mind trying to force the pieces into something that made sense. But the pattern continued, unbroken and deliberate. He looked down at his notes again. The sequences, the timing, the repetition. It wasn't just signaling, it was forming something, almost like a language, or the beginning of one. The beam swept across the water again, and the lights below shifted to meet it. Closer this time, not rising, but aligning, as if whatever was beneath the surface wasn't trying to reach the lighthouse, but trying to match it perfectly. He closed the logbook slowly, his eyes still fixed on the moving darkness beyond the glass. Somewhere deep below, something vast was watching the light and beginning to understand. He didn't write everything down anymore. At first, he had tried, every flash and every interval, every sequence. He carefully recorded it and measured it, trying to explain it. But the patterns had changed. They no longer repeated cleanly. They shifted and adjusted. They reacted. He noticed it on the fourth night. He had altered the rotation again, just slightly as a test. The beam slowed across the water, lingering longer than before. The response came instantly, longer, matching him. He tightened his grip on the controls and adjusted again, faster this time and sharper. The light below followed, not delayed or approximate, exact. He stepped back slowly, his eyes locked on the water. That wasn't coincidence. That wasn't pattern recognition. Something was watching the light and adapting to it in real time. He left the tower early that night. He didn't wait for the next sequence. He didn't want to. Back below, the silence felt different. He moved to the desk, flipping open the logbook, staring at the pages filled with his own handwriting. For a moment, he hesitated. Then he turned back a few entries, the timing logs and the sequences. Something about them felt off. He leaned closer, reading carefully now. The earlier patterns were rough and uneven, but the newer ones, they were cleaner and simpler. He frowned, tracing one of the sequences with his finger. Short, long, pause. Short, pause, long. It wasn't just a pattern anymore. It was reducing itself and breaking down, like it was trying to become understandable. A faint sound broke the silence. He froze. It was static, low and uneven, coming from the radio. He hadn't turned it on. Slowly, he turned his head toward it. The speaker crackled softly, a thin layer of distortion filling the room. He stepped closer. The sound shifted, but not randomly, rather rhythmic. Short bursts and longer ones. Pauses. His stomach tightened. It was the same sequence, but not from the ocean, from inside the lighthouse. He reached out, hesitated for only a second, then adjusted the dial. The static sharpened and focused, and for a moment, just a moment, the pattern broke. Something else pushed through. It was a sound, not quite a voice, not quite anything human. It stretched across the static, uneven and distorted, as if it were forcing itself through something too small to contain it. He jerked his hand back. The radio snapped into silence. The room fell still again, painfully still. Slowly, he looked back toward the logbook, toward the page he had been reading. His breath caught. There was a new line at the bottom, written in the same careful handwriting. His handwriting. But he hadn't written it. You. He stared at it, unmoving. The rest of the sentence above it remained unfinished. If it begins to, and now, you. He stepped back from the desk, his pulse rising, his eyes darting toward the staircase, toward the tower above. The lighthouse hummed softly and steadily, but now it felt closer, as if listening. The light above continued its slow rotation, and far below something answered, not answering to the light, but to him. The following night he didn't wait for midnight, because the light had already turned on. He could feel it now, before he saw it, or even before he heard anything. A low awareness pressing at the edges of his thoughts. He climbed the tower anyway, forcing himself to look. The beam cut across the ocean, and something moved beneath it. Closer this time, and not hidden. He could see the shape now. It was vast. It shifted slowly under the surface, distorting the water above it, as though the sea itself struggled to contain it. The following night he didn't wait for midnight, because the light had already turned on. He could feel it now, before he saw it, or even before he heard anything. A low awareness pressing at the edges of his thoughts. He climbed the tower anyway, forcing himself to look. The beam cut across the ocean, and something moved beneath it. Closer this time, and not hidden. He could see the shape now. It was vast. It shifted slowly under the surface, distorting the water above it, as though the sea itself struggled to contain it. The lights within it pulsed, not randomly but in rhythm with the lighthouse. He stepped back from the glass. It wasn't just responding anymore, it was synchronizing. The realization hit him all at once. The signals, the patterns, the adjustments. It hadn't been learning the light, it had been aligning with it, preparing for something. A sound broke through the wind, sharp and close by. He turned toward the staircase. Another sound, but not from the ocean, from far below. A disturbing, dragging sound. He didn't remember moving, only that suddenly he was descending the steps too quickly, his hand sliding along the wall to steady himself. The sound grew louder and closer. By the time he reached the base, it had stopped. Silence filled the lower level of the lighthouse. The air felt thick and heavy. The door to the outside stood slightly open. He was certain he had closed it. For a long moment he didn't move. Then slowly, he stepped forward. The wind pushed gently against the door, carrying with it the scent of salt and something deeper. He pulled the door open. The night air hit him cold and sharp. The beam swept past overhead, casting brief light across the rocks below, and that's when he saw them. Footprints, wet splashes leading from the water's edge, up the rocks and toward the lighthouse. They were strange, long and narrow, spaced too far apart, as if whatever made them didn't move the way anything human should. His eyes followed them slowly, step by step, up to the base of the tower. And there they stopped, right at the door. He felt it before he saw it, that same pressure, but closer now. He lifted his head. The beam swept across the shoreline again, and for a fraction of a second, something stood at the edge of the light, tall and unclear. Its shape shifting at the edges, as though it didn't fully belong in the space it occupied. It didn't step into the beam. It didn't need to. It tilted slightly, not toward the light, but toward him. And in that moment, he understood. It hadn't come ashore by accident. It hadn't just followed the light. It had followed the signal, the patterns, the responses. Him. The beam passed again, and the figure was gone. But the footprints remained, fresh. Behind him, the lighthouse hummed, louder now, deeper, as if alive. He turned slowly, his eyes lifting up the height of the tower. The light above shifted just slightly. Not out toward the ocean, but inland. Toward the door and toward him. And far below the surface, something vast began to rise. He didn't go back outside. He couldn't. The door remained open, the night pressing in, the faint outline of those footprints still visible in the sweep of the light. But something had changed. He could feel it now, not just around him, but inside the lighthouse itself. The hum had deepened, slower and heavier, as if breathing. He turned away from the door and looked up the spiral staircase. The light above continued to rotate, steady and precise as always. He began to climb, but each step felt different now. The metal beneath his boots no longer rang the same way. The sound was soft and dull, almost as if it was absorbing the sound of his footsteps. He stopped halfway up. Slowly, he reached out and pressed his hand against the wall. It felt warm. He froze. The surface wasn't smooth anymore. It gave slightly beneath his touch. Not metal, but something else. Something layered beneath it. He pulled his hand back sharply, his breath catching as he stared at the wall. The paint hadn't changed. The structure hadn't shifted. But now that he felt it, he couldn't unfeel it. The lighthouse wasn't built, it was shaped. He continued upward, slower now, his eyes tracing every surface, every edge, every seam that no longer looked like construction, but rather imitation. At the top, the mechanism turned as it always had, or at least it appeared to. He stepped closer. There were no real joints and no true connections. The parts didn't fit together the way machinery should. They curved into one another, seamless, groaning. The light pulsed once, and for the briefest moment, the entire chamber seemed to shift with it. Not visibly, but enough. Enough for him to understand. The beam wasn't being projected. It was being emitted. He turned slowly toward the ocean. The light swept outward, and far below the surface, something answered. Not with flashes now, but with movement, massive and rising. The water bulged unnaturally beneath it, distorting as something impossibly large began to break toward the surface, and the beam adjusted, not scanning nor searching, locking onto a point just beyond the shoreline, the same place the footprints had ended, the same place he had been standing. His breath slowed. Everything aligned in a single quiet realization. The patterns, the signals, and the responses. It had never been communication. It had been calibration. And the lighthouse was never meant to guide ships. It was meant to guide them. Something moved behind him. He didn't turn. He didn't need to. The presence filled the room now, close and patient. The light pulsed again. And this time, it didn't sweep away. It held and focused. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, he stepped forward into the light. The beam brightened, the hum deepened, and far below, something finally reached the surface.
This has been An Old Tale After Dark.